Good evening. This is Zen Talk from the Atlanta Soto Zen Center in Atlanta, Georgia. It's November 8th, I believe, 2018. And this month is Founders Month, so we're featuring teachings from Matsuoka Roshi, who's our founding father. Today, I would like to introduce, I am Zenkai Taiyan Michael Elliston, the founder of the Silent Thunder Order and the Atlanta Soto Zen Center, and successor to Matsuoka Roshi in the Matsuoka lineage. And tonight we have a guest who will be interviewing me and doing a little monologue on Matsuoka Roshi's teaching, reading one of his teachings on the purpose of a Zen life, which some of you may have read. And his name is Keisei, which means sounds of mountain streams.
Sounds of valley streams.
Valley streams. And member of our board of directors here, long-term practitioner, Andrew Dietz. And so he will be my partner in crime tonight. This Thursday night series we will continue through the rest of the year and into 2019. We may have some Thursday evenings that we do not meet, but each month we'll have a different topic, which will be the thread running through the Thursday evenings of that month. This month it is Matsuoka Roshi and his teachings, as November is Founders Month. November is when Matsuoka Roshi was born and died, and so we set it aside every year as a celebration of his legacy and revisit his teachings. In December we will continue with teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. December is Buddha's Enlightenment Day month, December 8th. So December will be devoted to Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings. So each month in the upcoming year, 2019, will be devoted to a different focus or different topic. So with that, let me turn it over to Keisei Andrew Dietz and let him read for you this segment on the purpose of a Zen life by Matsuoka Roshi.
The world abounds with different religions to satisfy man's yearning spirit. Throughout time, man has yearned for something. For some, it's been the desire to be of good health, of good fame, to have a respected job, to become rich, to avoid mishap or trouble, to win the favor of the gods, or to enter into a pure land after death. There are myriad things one desires in their life, and most religions try to satisfy this hunger. Some promise success, heaven, or a bountiful harvest if a person faithfully follows their precepts. Many religious people are dreaming of a supernatural power far away from themselves, and of a fantastic world of good fortune when they pray and follow religious rites. Instead of living their lives more fully now, they dream fantasy and put their faith in something distant from themselves. Their lives are lived for another time or another being. Should this be the purpose of religion? In Zen, the purpose of the religious life is to find the truth about life in this world and then to live with this knowledge. Instead of hoping to obtain some material thing or fortune from a supernatural being, in Zen, we live in order to enter into the true life. We do not even desire to become a Buddha. For doing so takes the emphasis off the present moment of life and puts it into the unpredictable future. Instead, we live this moment to its fullest, and so act as to develop the potential to be a Buddha, which lies dormant in each of us. The Buddha once said, "If you kill your wrong way of thinking, you will find the truth about life." You ask, how can I rid myself of these errors? The key to this freedom was discovered centuries ago by the Buddha himself, after long years of searching for the truth. He finally settled in a seated position under a tree in a garden and resolved not to rise until he had found the truth. Sitting in this position enabled him to find it. One morning, as the dawn broke, the Buddha became enlightened. He discovered the Buddha nature within himself and the universe. His thinking no longer contained the errors that keep man in misery. Instead, his meditation had shown him the true life. This true life can be known to you too, just as it was to the Buddha. The key to it is the same for you as for him: meditation. Meditation will give you the knowledge of this true life, devoid of desires and without your yearning for it. When you meditate, you have already entered into the world of the Buddha and have the potential to be enlightened within you. Meditation empties your mind of the wrong ways of thinking so that you no longer desire things for yourself. You have become, as it were, empty. Your mind has become empty of the wrong way of thinking, and your heart has become empty of thoughts of yourself. Yet what has entered in is the wisdom of the Buddha. Enlightenment is not an annihilation of yourself, but a fulfillment. With wrong ways of thinking, you'll forever remain short of fulfilling your potential. Dogen Zenji explained following the way of the Buddha as studying the way of yourself. By studying yourself, he meant to become so aware of your true nature that you forget yourself completely. Through meditation, yourself is forgotten, as your desires and attachments to earthly things are replaced with the knowledge of the Buddha nature and with the spiritual freedom of the man of Zen. People who do not know this way of Zen meditation suffer all their lives. They have not freed themselves from the attachments to an earthly life that can be so pleasant to the senses, and their ways of thinking are deeply entrenched in them. As their lives go on, they fear for losing them. With them would go the pleasures they've known. As lives go on, time takes fortunes, health, loved ones, and only brings old age. One poet wrote, "People are born, get old, and die. This is our life." Many persons find themselves unceasingly wondering about the meaning of birth and death, or fearing the passage of their lives. If they would only free themselves from this wrong thinking, they would break loose of the cycle of life and death. They would rise above fear. Buddhism will give you a confident insight into this problem. It will lead you to the world beyond birth and death, called nirvana, enlightenment. This is the world which the Buddha found in his meditation and which solved for him his great question about the suffering in human life. He saw our life as merely an extension of nirvana, but separated from it by the ways of wrong thinking, desires, and attachments that cause us to suffer endless lives with the blink of an eyelash within a moment. To him, birth was error coming into being, while death was the same as a small candle's light melting into the brilliance of the sun. He saw this whole life as actually the life of a Buddha, but separated from it by the illusions of wrong thinking and desires. He urged us, "You must not think there is a moon shining beyond the clouds. The moonlight is always present, whether the clouds be there or not." The Buddha wanted us to know that his world is not something distant from our lives like a moon beyond the clouds. We can see the Buddha's world in this life and should not wait until after death. Do not wait for the disappearance of the clouds. Our wrong ways of thinking cause us to perceive opposites and to fail to see the enlightened world on this earth. The world of the Buddha is one in which there is no wise or unwise, beauty or ugliness, friend or foe, good or bad, life or death. All is one. This enlightened world can only be found in the life of Zen and cannot be described by the words of discrimination or imagined by the mind. Only by putting your whole self into meditation will it be perceived. The Buddha found this way of life 2,500 years ago. To him, meditation is the key to the world of appearances and of the mystery of life and death. It is the foundation of all his teachings and of the 80,000 sutras of tradition. The meditation of the Buddha is Zen. The way of Zen cannot be analyzed or discussed at length, lest the truth be overlooked. This is pointed out in the small poem by Yoka Daishi in the Shodoka, or Song of Realization. It goes, "A true disciple of the Buddha speaks the ultimate truth. If you do not agree with what I say, you're free to discuss it. You must remember, however, that Buddhism is concerned with the root of truth, not with the branches or leaves. You'll not find the root of truth by endlessly seeking the truth with your mind in books or in debates. These fall short of the depth of Zen. Only will the truth be found by meditation. It should be the meditation that is an inseparable part of one's daily life. Many people forget that Zen is not distinct from human life, but is one with it. All is the Zen world, even flowers, animals, the sky, the shining stars, the flowing rivers, and man. All is the appearance of the heart of the Buddha. Yet Zen is not distinct from this heart of the Buddha either, and is in all that we encounter. Many people make the mistake of thinking of Zen as something scholastic or of a particular sect, but it is not just doctrine. Its true life will not be found in books or discourses, but only within yourself in Zen meditation. This is why Dogen Zenji said, Zen could not be held like a teacup. It is not something that can be grasped and then preached to another, except for teaching him the essentials that will enable him to find its truth for himself. Even the answer to the question, what is Zen Buddhism, has died because it is not action. True Zen lies beyond speech and is only in action, meditation, and work. Zen is a religion that speaks heart to heart. It's contained in simple lives and found in silence. Many words will not describe it, nor can it be given to another. It only can be felt in another and found for oneself in the silence of meditation and the dedication of hard work. It is the truth that was seen in the mute smile of the Buddha as he held aloft the beautiful lotus flower to answer the question, what is Buddhism? And in the quick understanding of the disciple as he saw that smile. Zen is like this wherever it's found. It's the silent action that brings the truth to our awareness. Instead of something mysterious and far away, it's within ourselves.
Thank you. So, this part of the program, you will ask me questions about that.
I will. Let's start with a very broad one. Tell us about this piece. Matsuoka Roshi wrote a number, we've got 2 books filled with his talks, and I'm sure we could fill many, many more. What motivated you to choose the purpose of a Zen life?
It's brevity. And it's the question that keeps coming back in everybody's life who are practicing Zen. We don't immediately understand the purpose of a Zen life even if we're practicing Zen. And so it comes up time after time. You could ask a similar question, what is the purpose of a Christian life? What is the purpose of a life in Judaism? And what is the purpose of life in Islam, and so forth? Or an atheist. What is the purpose of life for an atheist? And you would probably have as many different answers as there are philosophies and religions, but also individuals within each philosophy or religion would probably have a different answer. So I think Matsuoka Roshi had a very simple and clear way of talking about what he saw as the purpose of a Zen life. And always, as always, he mentions that we will discover this purpose in our meditation. It's difficult to express it even to ourselves in words, or to have anybody else express this in such a way that we can say, you know, he's right, that's the purpose of the Zen life. You could say everybody is living a Zen life, whether they know it or not. People come to Zen thinking it's about life, and so I will learn something about life by practicing Zen. Then when you practice Zen for a while, you begin to understand that it's not that Zen is about life, life is about Zen. That is, the purpose of life is what Zen is pointing at. So it's expressed in many different ways. Matsuoka Roshi, people would ask him and he would say, every day is a happy day in Zen, every day is a good day. And somebody asked me what I would add to that, if anything, I said regardless. Regardless of the circumstances of your life or the circumstances of that day. And it's very easy for us to say in a situation, country where we're not subject to terrorism, warfare, such as people in other parts of the world. So our understanding of Zen being every day is a good day, every day is a happy day, is not meant to criticize others for their beliefs. It's not meant to say that everybody, no matter regardless of their circumstances, should be happy. Zen's philosophy, if you will, is not an excuse for inaction. When we see suffering in the world, we have to take action. It's not enough to say that everybody should be happy. We are happy. Why aren't they happy? The idea of karma comes into play, where we say, well, we're living in America. We have wonderful life by comparison to many people around the world, and it's our karma. We deserve it. We deserve. You see this in advertising all the time. You deserve this. You deserve something. From a Zen perspective, we really don't deserve anything other than the consequences of our life. And if we look at other people who are suffering and say, well, that's just their karma, this is a very profound misuse and abuse of the idea of Buddhism. Buddhism is not meant to be held up to criticize others, and it's not meant to be held up to make us feel that the injustices or imbalances in the world are okay because we have, in past lives, however we think of karmic consequences, karmic action over the 3 times, we have somehow been born into this situation in which we have very good circumstances, and somehow that means that we don't have to engage in helping others. We do, in Buddhism in general, we think that the most you can do for others is to share this practice with them. But if you don't have the basic needs for food, shelter, safety, warmth, the Maslow hierarchy of basic needs, or those are not met, then meditation may help you put up with or endure kind of the horrible circumstances in which you find yourself to some degree, but it's certainly not meant to be a substitute. And first things first, people have to be fed, they have to be sheltered, and then when those fundamental needs are taken care of, then meditation can help them in addressing, you might say, the higher needs of existence, to wake up to the truth and to be awakened, as we think Buddha was, to the spiritual truth. Complex question.
Let me ask you. Well, first, let me go back to this piece and ask a question about this idea of errors. And I can't quite find it, but at one point he spoke of being born as error or being born into an error. Help us understand that.
I think he's referencing Shakyamuni Buddha seeing birth as being a kind of mistake or kind of error.
Well, that's what my mother said of my birth, but I don't know if that may be different.
And, I might agree. This kind of error, according to Buddhism, everything arises out of ignorance, and it's kind of an innocent ignorance, which is simply not knowing, not knowing. If you think about it, before you were born, when you were in your mother's womb for 9 months or so, and you come into being, how could you know what it is that you're being born into? And yet, Buddhism holds that we have some kind of desire to be born. Obviously, all of life does. There's so much fecundity, fertility in life in all forms. Everything is trying to be born. Everything is trying to come into existence in living matter, at least living sentient beings and in sentient beings, the plant kingdom and so forth. So there's this underlying desire or push to exist. We think, or in Buddhism we say that I was born because I wanted to be born, and so I am responsible for my own birth, even though it turns out that there may be many aspects of my life that I don't like, or that I feel like I didn't bargain for. Here you are, you have what you wanted, you exist. So we accept it with all of its good, bad, and ugly, all of its faults and so forth. But it's a kind of mistake in that we don't know what we're getting into, and yet we get into it.
Let me ask for clarification on this. So, we wanted to be born. So would sound like a self willing itself into existence, and I wonder if that's if there's something else there that's meant.
In Buddhism, we question the self in the sense of the constructed self. The soul, or in Buddha's time in India called Atman, the self-existent self that is born into this life, that survives death and is reborn and reincarnated, that is, in another life and so forth. This Buddha called into question, saying that he did not find any evidence of that in his experience. So the self in Buddhism is not that self-existent soul or Atman, that type of a self-existent being that is basically takes on this body and then the next life exchanges this body for another body, as much as we might change clothes. It's a fuzzy area, but the way Buddhism looks at rebirth, not reincarnation, but rebirth, is that the one that is reborn is not the one that died. There's not the same person or the same being, but there is a karmic connection between the two. So it's a little more complex idea than the simple idea of this self that I have constructed that has all of these attributes that I might define or identify with as being myself and different from you, different from others. This constructed self is called into question in Buddhism. So you're exactly right. How could there be this self existing before birth if it doesn't even exist after birth? So the true self in Buddhism is the self that is not constructed, the self that is the only self that can do what this self can do. I cannot do what you can do. You cannot do what I can do. So in that sense, we're individuated from each other. We're different. And I can take action that you cannot take. So this is the self that is not others, is one way it's expressed in Zen. The self that is not others is the one that can take action, suffer the consequences, or help in a situation. This true self is based on action, as Matsuoka Roshi is pointing out in here. So this is a way of action. And it is not limited to the constructed self, the dimensions of the constructed self that we imagine. And the witness to that is that all of the dimensions of self that we identify with are ever changing. We breathe and we think I am breathing. And we know that I'm not breathing, the body is actually doing the breathing. We think, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. The brain is actually doing the thinking. We think these are my feelings, my emotions, and so forth. But when we pay attention to breathing, our mental emotions, mood swings, emotional mood swings, physical sensations, our breath, our heartbeat, everything that we can point to and identify as part of this living self is ever changing, moment by moment, is impermanent. And so the self that we imagine as being in the center of all of this change must itself also be changing. So if it is changing, how can it be the constructed self, which we identify as being this fixed in this way, or permanent, surviving death? This is illogical from a Buddhist perspective.
All right, let me take a different.
But back to the desire. Yeah. The desire that brought us into being, some of us would like to blame our parents, right? Our parents are the reason we were born. In Buddhism, it's not so simple. We have an affinity with our parents, and so we come into birth through our parents, through an affinity with them. But we take it on ourselves to say that we are responsible for our own birth. After a while, if you want to hold your parents responsible, after a while they've passed away and you're still alive. So how can you hold a dead person responsible for your existence? So in Zen or Buddhism, it only makes sense that we assume this responsibility for our own existence, as temporary as it is.
Let me shift the angle on the purpose of a Zen life and tell us what was the purpose of Matsuoka coming from the East, and how do we know if his purpose was realized?
Well, actually, he came from the West, since he came from Japan.
He came the other way, from the West.
Yeah, from the West. But one simple way to answer the question, what is the purpose of a Zen life, you could say it is to wake up to the reality. And these debates we have around the self, etc., are all parts of that teaching. But to fully wake up the way Buddha did, Buddha comes from the root word bud, meaning awake. So he woke up fully to the reality in which he found himself, in the same reality in which we find ourselves. So Matsuoka Roshi, coming from Japan to America in 1939, was to bring this mission to America. This is the direct way of learning Buddhism, the direct way of learning the truth about reality by sitting in meditation, having direct insight into the true conditions of our existence. It's actually the same mission that Master Dogen in 13th century Japan, coming back from China when he was around 27 years old, brought to Japan, what he considered to be the true way, and that he had had profound insight experience under his teacher in China, and he was 27 years old. Matsuoka Roshi was 27 years old when he came to America. I was about 27 years old when I met Matsuoka Roshi in Chicago in the 1960s. So I think that period of time, they say in our 20s, our brain finishes wiring and we have a sense of mortality, and we have we begin to have a different take on existence. As adolescents, we're invincible and invulnerable. We don't know enough to know how fragile life is. So it seems around those mid-20s, that's when a person starts to look around and try to figure out, what's missing here in my life, what's missing in my understanding. So Matsuoka Roshi, coming to America at about that time of his life, he had obviously already had some kind of profound insight, or why would he come to America? He could have stayed in Japan, and he was very well educated and doing well within the hierarchy of the Soto Zen establishment in Japan. So he probably could have had a pretty comfortable life there, except for World War II, which was just coming on the scene. So about 1939, 1940, I was born in 41, so he arrived in America about the time I was born. And then, of course, the war was pretty much underway and through until 1945. So all of that story we are telling in the documentary, the video documentary on Matsuoka Roshi, the history and how he fit into all those patterns.
And that includes footage of you and several other people from our Sangha going to Japan.
Yes, going to Japan, retracing his origins, and looking at the significance and implications of his coming over here just before the war and staying here through the war. And he became a bridge builder. He was promoting peace between enemies, United States and Japan, during the war, after the war. And a couple of his talks that we have published are called Zen Can Bridge East and West. So his purpose in coming here was the same fundamental purpose, Bodhidharma going to China, Dogen bringing this back to Japan, Sensei coming to America, was to, in particular, to bridge East and West. But in Bodhidharma's case, in Dogen's case, it was to bridge between cultures, India and China, China and Japan, and then Japan and America, bridge between these cultures, bringing the genuine Zen practice. Every country has had a lot of book knowledge about Buddhism or Zen. The paper transmission of the teaching always precedes, because it's easier, precedes the literal or physical transmission from teacher to student. And so Matsuoka Roshi was in that tradition of bringing the actual direct practice to America, just as Bodhidharma had brought to China and Dogen had brought to Japan.
So the practice, that real Dharma, the real Zen, doesn't change, or maybe even can't change, but the approach to teaching, first of all, is that correct? And second, if it is, the approach to bringing that Dharma, exposing or engaging people in Zen practice, that approach has changed. Bodhidharma took a different approach, Dogen took adapted the approach to their circumstances. Talk a little bit about how Matsuoka did that in America.
Well, if you read the Kyosaku and the Mokurai, the books that we published, his talks, you hear how he talks about various things that were happening, like the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and so forth, and he puts these in a contextual treatment around the principles of Zen Buddhism. And so he understood that he was teaching in a foreign country, teaching in a second language, teaching in a different culture, where he had to bridge the gap between the way Americans or Westerners in general see religion, and how does Zen fit that picture. We often say Zen is not really a religion. How does the cultural attitudes that we have about the consumerist society, what does happiness consist of, and those kinds of things. He was trying to show how Zen approaches things in a very simple way, and we can be happy with very little. How we are really responsible for the consequences of our own actions, but in a very different way than the politicians tend to discuss that. It's very more personal and very, very direct. And so I think in a way he was a genius. He had a genius for translating, you might say, not only across language, but also across culture, these fundamental principles of Zen as he experienced them in a Japanese culture, very different from ours. And of course, he learned a different language. He grew up with Japanese, very, very different. So he had some sort of genius where he was able to leap the gap and translate between languages and cultures and make these teachings very down to earth, very immediate, everyday, and accessible to people who live in a totally different kind of culture and society than he grew up in. So I think for that, we owe him and the other early pioneers of Zen in America a deep debt of gratitude.
So it was, I call him a pioneer of pause, a pioneer of being able to stop and sit. But there's another kind of pioneering that seems to have happened and is continuing, and that is moving Zen out or beyond the monastery walls and making it live in a world, of the layperson.
He was not that different from Dogen in that way, because Dogen was definitely a promoter of Zen to the public. But Dogen lived as a monastic and was very high on the monastic lifestyle and the principles of monasticism. Matsuoka Roshi felt that Zen been in Japan for 800, 900 years. It sort of reached the limits of its growth there, and had begun to ossify just from sheer mass, and that it would find its rebirth in America. And he also felt that that would be in lay practice. The monastic lifestyle, by definition, is somewhat exclusive. Zen as a lay practice is all inclusive. So how many people can really become monastics? How many people can practice Zen? We say Zen is for everyone. Although everyone may not be ready for Zen, Zen is for everyone. Anybody in any situation other than the most extreme, dire straits that we've talked about, can reasonably practice Zen. And anybody of any faith can practice Zen, because Zen is not a competitive faith. Even Buddhism is not a competitive set of beliefs. They're fundamental beliefs that each individual, each human being, your practice will be different from mine. Each human being's practice will be different, even though we all look like we're doing the same thing in meditation, sitting in the Zendo. Everybody's actually doing something different. Zen can be custom tailored to each person. You can fit it into your life in a way that nobody else is fitting it into their life. So we think Zen is the religion of the future, and using the word religion loosely. It's a spiritual practice. It can complement any other faith, any other of the world's great religions, and actually any philosophy that you may happen to have. But your practice in meditation may lead you to certain kinds of experiences that may seem to challenge your beliefs, challenge your philosophy in some pretty direct ways, all for the better.
I don't know if we have questions that we want to take.
Yes, I think we can take questions from the audience. Anybody? There you go. Yeah.
Can you talk more about what you think some of the more unique challenges are from the older Japanese teachings, and how maybe the teaching has changed since?
How many?
So if you can repeat that question. No, not. We'll repeat that question. If you
Okay.
can talk a little bit more about how Zen has changed from the original teachings or the older teachings, and how it's adapted.
Well, fundamentally, it doesn't change. The emphasis in Soto Zen in particular on upright seated meditation is kind of a whole body practice. So we're learning the wisdom of the body. We're learning from the body. We follow the posture. The body will teach us the posture eventually. We have instructions that we give about sitting upright, and then balance and so forth. And these are the same instructions Dogen gave 850 years ago or so. So in that way it hasn't changed. But some ways it has not changed. But in the way we live today, we have so much more information overload on our stuff coming from the media. We're deluged with information from all around the world. And even in Dogen's time, they didn't have that kind of access to information. They had some, but it's kind of a burden for us. So in some ways, we live in interesting times, and we live in worse times. May you live in interesting times is an old Chinese curse. Our times are multiplied in terms of the interest, you might say, because there's so much going on, and we're just beaten down with all of this.
So our monkey mind is amplified by all this technology and media.
Yeah, monkey mind is the busy mind, thinking mind. We speak of discriminating mind, chattering, the internal dialogue, chatter. That hasn't changed. It's probably just gotten worse. It's changed in that sense. The fundamental problems of suffering that Buddha pointed out are changed, of aging, sickness, and death. We still confront those. And yet, culturally, we try to postpone death as long as possible. We have all kinds of medical techniques for sustaining life. So I think Matsuoka Roshi used to say, civilization conquers us. So probably the biggest difference between our practice and our lives and those of the ancestors in the countries of origins would revolve around those ideas of complexity versus a relatively simple way of life. The old teachings still hold true. You probably would have a difficult time finding a set of instructions for doing anything very important from 900 years ago that we're still following virtually verbatim today in terms of how to do meditation. Our bodies have not changed that much. The physiological bodies have not changed that much. You may say we have cancer, we have other diseases that people did not suffer from in the old days as far as we know. And pollution. The 7 billion and counting population put a lot of pressure on life systems, the ecology. So I think those, the known factors, are probably the critical differences. But for us, so those are more or less social. They do impact us personally. But the personal level of practice is essentially the same as it was 2,500 years ago in India. The fundamental problem of existence hasn't changed. And what we can do about it is to sit in meditation and face it rather than run away from it. Now, our culture has given us a lot more ways to run away from it.
This idea that no matter how culture has changed, no matter how our lives have changed, this ability to sit quietly and find, the moon behind the clouds is the way that it was quoted in this piece by Matsuoka. That stays the same. You must not think there's a moon shining beyond the clouds. The moonlight is always present, whether the clouds be there or not.
I think he may have meant something by that when we do meditation, if we have an insight, it's not because of the meditation. It didn't change anything. Anything we have insight into is already true. This is the moonlight behind the clouds. Simply because there are clouds there, we think there's no moonlight. But it's always there. And so the reality of Buddhism, call it what you will, is always present whether we know it or not. So our process is one of uncovering reality, hopefully removing the layers of ignorance that we have about it, so that what is revealed is the truth. So did that come close to answering your question? Anything further on that? Anyone else?
Any final thoughts, Sensei, on the purpose of a Zen life, on Matsuoka and his purpose and meaning?
To go beyond thinking, to not rely on thought, to get to a deeper level of intuitive understanding of our existence. So rather than final thoughts, I would say there's final unthought.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your teaching.
You be well. Please plan to join us next Thursday, same time, 7 o'clock. We'll have another teaching on Matsuoka Roshi. And perhaps we will have a panel
Very good.
of our students.